Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Hardink, Principal Keyboard with Utah Symphony. I recently recorded a piece by Anthony Green, composer with me today, titled To Anacreon in the US. And while it's always wonderful to connect composers with audience, I think with a piece like this, especially that has such an amazing kind of backstory, it's great to be able to talk about this and present this to our audience so they can learn more about what this piece is about. Anthony is an amazing composer. We're actually collaborating on future projects, and we can talk about that at the end a little bit if we want. One of the first ways in which we connected is kind of silly, but we both grew up in Rhode Island. You fairly younger than me, but how many Rhode Islanders went on to have careers in the field of modern music? So it seems like a natural, inevitable that we would connect someday, right?
Yeah, I think Wendy Carlos is really the first.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
Yeah.
there were some before her, but really
Yeah.
Wendy Carlos.
So just a little bit about Anthony. You're based in the Netherlands, correct?
Yes.
But your earlier part of your career was really focused on New England. You've co-founded Castle of Our Skins, which is an organization dedicated to celebrating Black artistry through music.
Yes.
And fantastic organization, and great for performers who want to research Black composers, Black musicians, and just use it as a resource.
Definitely.
Absolutely. So let's talk about your piece a little bit.
Okay.
And I guess we start with the story of our national anthem.
Yeah, we can sort of do that. The national anthem of the United States is based on this piece called the Anacreonic Hymn, and it's more lovingly referred to as To Anacreon in Heaven. And it was this piece composed for this gentleman's society in the UK. It was first published around 1784, and the men of this gentleman's high culture society in the UK would typically sing this song before the lighter part of their ceremonies. So it's usually referred to as a drinking song, but it's not a drinking song per se. You wouldn't go to a bar in the late 1700s in the UK and find 400 inebriated Brits shouting to Anacreon in Heaven at the top of their lungs. This was more a high culture drinking song. And what's cool about the lyrics of this song is that each refrain, each verse ends with a reference to Bacchus or Dionysus, who's
Right.
the god of wine and merriment and fertility. So
Right. And so just to be clear, for people who don't know, so the melody to this song is the same melody as the Star Spangled Banner. So Francis Scott Key wrote new text for this melody that already existed.
yeah, and oddly enough, the melody to our national anthem is extremely similar. It's not the same. The most noticeable difference is the raised fourth. So dia da dum dia dia da is
Okay.
in the United States, and in the original it's dia da dum dia da dum. And it's really hard for me to even sing it that way, having sung the raised fourth all of my life.
Right. Right. um, so is this I have to say that this story kind of involved a small mind explosion when I read about it, because I'm just so surprised that our national anthem, this sacred sort of musical shared song between Americans, is the melody is not original. You know, how long have you known about this?
I knew about it for a while, and
Okay.
it's kind of typical though, because God Save the Queen is My Country 'Tis of Thee, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's not the first piece of Americana to do this. And oddly enough, So I did a residency in the Gettysburg National Military Park, and I came across a Civil War song that uses Le Marseillaise as a
Oh,
melody.
yeah. Huh.
Yeah, so people in the United States have been doing this forever with songs from Europe, and not
Yeah.
even just the UK. And there is a link between Le Marseillaise and this particular piano piece.
Right.
Yeah.
So should we dive into your piece then?
Yeah, let's do
Okay.
it. So for this piece to Anacreon in the US, I was commissioned by a pianist named Victor Rosenbaum, who had this project for his piano students at New England Conservatory to write these response pieces to Debussy preludes. And as a pianist myself, I grew up playing lots and lots of Debussy, love playing Debussy. And one of my favorite pieces to play from his is Feu d'artifice, which means fireworks. And at the end of Feu d'artifice, Debussy quotes Le Marseillaise in this really mysterious setting. So, for those of you who haven't heard this prelude, he has this trembling in the left hand in a really low register. It's not the lowest register of the piano. And then with the right hand, he has the melody of Le Marseillaise, one part not from the beginning. So you hear biam bam biadam bam bia, and then you hear diadam, which is the theme of the prelude. So this trembling is obfuscating Le Marseillaise, and then the theme interjects Le Marseillaise, and he has this weird chord progression that has this slight upward gesture. And I just thought that this sound world to end a prelude and to end all of the preludes, because it's the last prelude of book two, it's this really subtle, mysterious sound world that I just wanted to live in for a really long time with this piece. However, I wanted to bring back a little bit of Feu d'artifice as well. So right before this sound world happens, Debussy has these successions of crazy diminished chords. And so that's why I ended the piece the way it ends.
Right. Right. Um, oh, interesting. What is there more significance to the melodic material that's quoted than just the parallel with Debussy?
Oh yeah, definitely. I live in the Netherlands. I've moved here in 2013. And all of my life growing up as a Black homosexual man, I have not really felt like I was a real citizen of the United States. And that is one of the big undiscussed feelings amongst Black Americans. And some of these conversations are still happening today, but when you live your life exposed to racism, gentrification, portrayals of Blackness as criminals and hooligans in public mediums, on TV, in the news, in movies, etc. You grow up with the stereotypes, you don't read about Black heroes in history, etc., and so on and so forth, then you actually feel a little bit embarrassed to be Black. Some people do.
Mhm.
And so all of this has just resulted in me not really feeling like a United States citizen. But it really wasn't until I moved to the Netherlands where I got to examine what being a United States citizen really means for individuals and what it means to me. So it was interesting for me to write this piece that is, in my opinion, a little bit of a piquant commentary
Mhm.
on citizenship and what it means to belong to the fabric of the United States.
Hmm. Yeah, I wondered about like the title of your piece specifically, like to Anacreon in the US. Is it more than just a play on the, the original melody to the Star Spangled Banner?
A little bit. The original lyrics do talk about Anacreon and this charge that he has, and it evokes all of these other Greek gods and goddesses and paints this very idyllic picture.
Mm.
However, if you remove Anacreon from this setting across the Atlantic and bring Anacreon to the United States through the lens of a Black person, the picture isn't as idyllic. And this piece basically implies that.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to. I'm just thinking about, okay, this is a nonsensical question, right? Does your piece quote, does it quote the Star Spangled Banner, or does it quote To Anacreon in Heaven? Does that make sense, that question? Like, or obviously the answer is this complex, everything is sort of wrapped up and it's the same thing. But I'm not trying to answer the question for you. I should just let you speak.
No worries. I would say that in the same way Le Marseillaise started as this war song that was eventually adapted to be the national anthem of France, does Debussy quote Le Marseillaise, or is he quoting the original intentions of the song? And I think it's a little bit of both. I think my piece is quoting the national anthem and quoting the ridiculousness of adopting a British high class drinking song to be such a sacred piece of music. And also the national anthem, when you read the lyrics, it tacitly approves slavery. So there's quite a lot of layers in
Right.
me working with this material. But it's also a very short piece. So it's really nice that we're having this conversation, because it wouldn't really be typical for people to immediately look into all of this and try to read into what my piece is saying.
Sure.
But I would imagine, as you did, that people who are interested in playing it or interested in just engaging with finding the answer to the meaning of the title, they would eventually stumble across all of this. And I think that level of what I like to call rhizomic curiosity, like an onion, you're pulling back all of these layers and you're finding these new things. I love to take my audiences on those types of journeys. Yeah.
Well, certainly as a performer, that's immensely gratifying to feel like you'll never fully understand a piece and that you want to keep playing it for years and years.
Nice.
I have kind of a geeky question, which is, so when you first, okay, let me say this, that for the audience, the sort of fantasy on this melody, the quotation of it, is really only going to be audible to most people for like the first few notes. You'll hear, the E, eventually a C sharp, then an A, and you sort of get, okay, that's the triad that begins the melody. But the fact that it begins in A major, is there any reason for that when we commonly sing, the Star Spangled Banner in B flat?
No, there's really no deeper meaning to that. I just thought it would make for a better pianism with all of the licks. So I try to play as much of my music as I can at the piano when I'm writing for piano, as it is my instrument, but I am not as much of a virtuoso as you are. So I can play through things a little bit slowly and make sure they feel good. So when I was playing this in A major, it felt really good with the addition of all of those licks.
Okay.
And especially with this running 16th note part where you have to insert a melody with your thumb, it just made so much more sense physically in A
Right.
major.
See, I was wondering, this is so silly, I don't even want to say it, but I was like, oh, well, pitch was so much lower at the time that this was written. So I was wondering if the fact that it was lowered a semitone would reflect that the B flat major of, the early 19th century would actually sound like A major today.
That's interesting, though. I unfortunately did not come up with that on my own, but I will probably use that as an answer in the future. So thank you for making me a little bit smarter. But I would say I spent my life playing piano in churches, especially this one Black church around down the street and around the corner from where I lived in Providence, Rhode Island. And it's very common to take the original keys of those hymns and put them down either a half or a whole step for the congregation, because some of those original keys are a big ask for amateur voices.
Yeah.
So perhaps I also just did this instinctually because of my upbringing in the United States.
Yeah.
And I think Charles Ives did stuff like that too in some of his songs that make fun of typical hymns. So, Shall We Gather at the River,
Right.
which I think is such a hilarious song, and so many singers sing it with this very serious bel canto, and I'm just thinking, why? He's making fun of those deacons that just can't sing.
Right. They run out of breath, they're off pitch.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, I wanted to say that I'm looking forward to listening to the playback of this recording, because I think for me as a performer, I kind of just have to play the piece like a Debussy prelude, and there's no time to think about what anything means, if that makes sense. You play the piece as a beautiful piece of music. But now I'm looking forward to listening to it as an audience member and having the space to think about it more. And the Debussy part of it, I mean, you said you took that low rumble. I'm sitting at the piano, so I'm looking down there.
Oh, nice.
You took the low rumble of that last Debussy prelude and embraced that for pretty much the entirety of your piece. In the Debussy, I think of that rumble as just kind of, there's a band kind of marching off into the distance, and maybe the rumble is some train noise or wind blowing in the trees or whatever. But I think it has greater significance in your piece. I mean, does that sound of that noise, really, it's just noise, you can't hear pitch. I keep wanting to ask you, what does it mean? But that's such a silly question. But obviously it's more important than it is in the Debussy to your.
I don't think it's necessarily a silly question. I think you're engaging in the aspect of my process, and that's completely valid. So for the Debussy, it's an open fifth, and he does interrupt that open fifth with this chromatic grace note figure, but essentially it's an open fifth, and open fifths are actually quite stable as a harmony. It's really a foundational harmony, and I'm not sure what was in Debussy's mind when he notated this low rumbling as an open fifth, but when rumbling in that register is an open fifth, it doesn't sound as sinister as those last chromatic pitches, the lowest chromatic pitches on the piano that you just played. So part of me was trying to extend this foundational rumbling idea to this idea where the foundation is actually cracking. So that's a little bit how I feel about the United States, and it's kind of been evident this past year for more ways than one. But also, and I think this is the more interesting thing, there's a Black composer who was enslaved all of his life named Blind Tom. And 50 years before Charles Ives and Cowell, he wrote a piece that encapsulated the sound of the Battle of Manassas.
I think I've heard you play this piece, right?
Yes, you've heard me play this. And in doing so, he has these low clusters at the bottom of the piano, and they're super loud because they're supposed to mimic these cannons.
Hmm.
So a part of me accessing this low register throughout the piece is also me wanting to evoke a little bit of residue from the Battle of Manassas, which is also a super Americana piece of music when you think about it.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like because I play in an orchestra. So when you hear a low timpani roll, which is a little bit what that rumbling can sound like, it's always an ambiguous gesture because you don't know if it foretells tragedy or if it's like a dominant role where, in the scherzo to the Beethoven 5, it's going to go from C minor to C major.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like the ambiguity of that sound because it can be sinister, but it can be hard to tell sometimes.
Definitely. It all depends on what it's supporting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same in this piece, right?
Yeah.
Because it starts out supporting this major melody that we're all familiar with, but that only lasts for a couple of seconds before it starts to erode. So.
Right. Well, even the thing I love is the space at the beginning of your piece is such that, okay, like I said, you can sort of pick out the first three notes of the melody, but they're so far apart. Your ear is already being stretched to, you already sort of realize this is not going to just quote the melody in some bland, celebratory way.
Yeah, it's not a cookie cutter piece at all. And it's also this further extension of the sound world that Debussy created. So,
Absolutely.
in the same manner where I took this low rumbling and just pushed it further to the extremes of the piano, the quotation of the Marseillaise also happens in pretty close proximity with each of the notes of the part that he's quoting. So you hear diam bam diadam ba bam very quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to stretch that. If I'm going to quote a national anthem and I'm pushing that low rumble even further, then I'm going to insert more space and more guts and just sit in this sound.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I had all of this space, because I'm essentially zooming in on that last page and
Right.
using some of Debussy's wit to be a medium, actually to give me permission to be just as witty and maybe even a little bit more saucy to
Mm-hmm.
my birth country.
Yeah, it's interesting because you say in the preface to the score that this piece could be played as like a postlude to the Debussy prelude. So I also find that there are little firework moments that seem to reference the Debussy itself, little gestures high in the piano that sound so much, maybe not necessarily like that piece, but a reference to his language and to what that piece represents.
Definitely. I was so thinking of this idea of fizzled fireworks, which to me also appears in that last page. But the fizzling is short lived because Debussy's piece is more about the fireworks show than the end of the show, right?
Yeah.
So here we are to Anacreon in the US, and in a way, this idea of fizzled fireworks, the end of this big bang, kind of like the period that we're living in right now with regards to the United States being a superpower, right? It's fizzling. We're in this end of the big show era. And for some people, it was never a big show, right? For many Black Americans, the whole idea of making America great again, well, it was never great, you know? So
Yeah. Well, the firework, I mean, tying in with just the idea of fireworks, because Debussy's piece doesn't sound patriotic or anything like that, but fireworks are something you associate with um, those types of celebrations. So that also seems like another layer of irony in your piece, that those little sparks most often are, very soft and kind of distant, as if there's an act of fading or degradation, or of something decaying
Yeah,
almost.
yeah. Or people just walking away.
Mm-hmm.
We're
Right.
turning our back on this spectacle and just walking away.
Mhm. Wow. Well, maybe that's a good note to close this conversation on, because I could talk about this all day, but uh, they asked us for a 10-minute video, and I'm trying to stay in that realm.
I think we've already doubled it, but that's fine.
Okay. Well, just to sign off, I think there'll be information posted at the end of this video, but there's a Utah Symphony on-demand program that begins with Anthony's piece, To Anacreon in the US. It's followed by Ravel Tzigane, which I liked that pairing simply because I wanted to put some French music with your piece, just to keep that connection there. And then the program ends with a Beethoven trio. So you can watch the performance there, and I can't thank you enough for chatting with me about this.
Thank you.
And then, yeah, someone can just edit it right there.